Welcome to Sleepy Tales. My name is Mateus, and before we begin today's story, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below saying, "I'll sleep well tonight." Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into tonight's tale. It started with a whisper. Rumors of a strange virus that turned people into violent, flesh-eating monsters. At first, nobody believed it. But soon enough, the news started pouring in. Cities across the world were falling to the outbreak, and nobody knew how to stop it. Jack had seen it coming. A former soldier with a knack for survival, he knew that something like this was bound to happen eventually. When the first reports of the outbreak started coming in, he immediately started preparing himself and his family. He stocked up on food, water, and weapons, and taught his wife and kids how to defend themselves. But it wasn't enough. The outbreak spread faster than anyone could have imagined, and soon, Jack was the only one left alive in his family. He wandered the streets, gun in hand, searching for any other survivors. But all he found were empty streets and the occasional growling of the infected. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Jack survived on a diet of canned food and bottled water, moving from place to place, always on the lookout for a safe haven. But no matter where he went, the infected were always close behind. One day, he stumbled upon a group of survivors. They were holed up in an old warehouse, armed to the teeth and ready for anything. Jack approached them cautiously, wary of being attacked. "Who are you?" one of the survivors asked. "I'm Jack," he said. "I've been on my own for a while now. I'm just looking for a safe place to rest." The survivors welcomed him into their group, and for the first time in months, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. They were a motley crew, made up of all sorts of people, a doctor, a mechanic, a mother with her children, and even a teenager who had survived on her own for weeks. The group worked together to fortify the warehouse, building barricades and setting up traps to keep the infected at bay. They shared their supplies and took turns keeping watch. Jack finally felt like he was part of a team again. But one night, everything changed. Jack was on watch duty, scanning the darkness for any signs of danger. Suddenly, he heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. He tensed, ready to fire his gun. But it wasn't an infected. It was one of their own. The survivor emerged from the shadows, a crazed look in his eyes. Jack recognized him as one of the newer members of the group, a man who had joined them a few days ago. He was covered in scratches and bite marks, his skin pale and clammy. "He's infected!" Jack yelled, raising his gun. But before he could fire, the man lunged at him, teeth bared. Jack barely managed to dodge the attack, but he stumbled and fell, hitting his head on the concrete. When he came to, he was tied up, his hands and feet bound. The other survivors were gathered around him, looking at him with fear and suspicion. "What's going on?" Jack asked, struggling against the ropes. "You're infected," the doctor said, his voice cold. "We can't take any chances. We have to protect ourselves." Jack tried to protest, to tell them that he was fine, that he had been immune to the virus. But they didn't believe him. They took his gun and his supplies, and left him tied up in the warehouse. Days passed, and Jack started to lose hope. He knew that the virus was spreading, that the infected were getting closer and closer. He needed to escape, to find a way out before it was too late. One night, as Jack lay there in the dark, he heard a noise. It was a soft tapping at the warehouse door, the sound of someone trying to get in. He strained his ears, listening closely. And then he heard it again, louder this time. He knew what it was. The infected had finally found them. But to his surprise, the survivors didn't seem worried. They didn't rush to the door, didn't grab their weapons. They just stood there, watching and waiting. And then, the door opened. And in walked Jack's wife. "Jack," she cried, running to his side. "Are you okay?" He stared at her, stunned. How are you here?" "We heard about this place," she explained. "We've been looking for you. We thought you might be here." Jack couldn't believe it. He had thought his entire family was dead, that he was the only one left. But here they were, alive and well. He hugged his wife and kids, tears streaming down his face. But then, he noticed something odd. The other survivors weren't celebrating. They weren't happy to see his family. They were angry. "Why did you bring them here?" the mechanic snarled. "They could be infected." "We have to protect ourselves," the doctor said, his eyes cold. Jack's wife looked around nervously, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" "They don't believe me," Jack said. "They think I'm infected." His wife's eyes widened in horror. "What? That's ridiculous." But the other survivors didn't back down. They argued and shouted, accusing Jack's family of endangering them. And then, things turned violent. Jack and his family fought back, trying to defend themselves. But they were outnumbered, and the other survivors were armed. In the chaos, Jack's wife and kids were killed. Jack was devastated. He had lost his family all over again, this time at the hands of the very people he had thought were his friends. He was alone once more, with nothing but his grief and his rage. He vowed to get revenge on the other survivors, to make them pay for what they had done. And so he waited, biding his time, gathering his strength. And when the infected finally broke through their barricades, he was ready. He fought his way through the horde, his anger fueling him. And when he finally stood before the other survivors, he didn't hesitate. He killed them all, one by one, until there was nobody left. And then he sat in the empty warehouse, surrounded by the bodies of his former friends, and he realized he had become a monster too. The virus might not have infected him, but the loss and the pain had twisted him into something just as deadly. Thank you for listening to this bedtime story, and remember, if you struggle with falling or staying asleep at night, click on the first link in the description for the ultimate solution to your problem. Now, choose one of these two videos and continue on our journey in the world of bedtime stories.